Hi, my name is Betania Perkins, and today we're going to be speaking about the history of Pentecostalism, which is best described in three different waves: the classical Pentecostalism, the charismatic renewal, and the neo charismatic movement. Each are slightly different. The classical Pentecostalism starts in the early 1900s and focuses on the book of Acts and the message of Pentecost. It's evangelistic in nature and rises out of the holiness movement. Uh, Dr. Ryan Reeves from Gordon Conwell Theological Seminary describes it as the intensification of some of the revivalistic elements that were part of the American church experience since its inception, and not only part of the American experience, but also for the global experience of charismatic movements from the 1700s, where John Wesley and the beginning of Methodism and the awareness of the Spirit's operation in Russia and India, Scotland, and Finland. We had seen some of speaking in tongues as part of the baptism of the Holy Spirit. So this phenomena of the charismatic, known as the charismatic movement, and the speaking in tongues and the gifts of the Spirit in today's church can be seen from the early 1700s in historical documentation. But Pentecostalism, as is known today, can be traced back to the Azusa Street revival. And we cannot speak about the Azusa Street revival without speaking about Charles Parham in Topeka, Kansas, at the Bethel Bible School. He starts teaching about the Pentecostal type movement, where the gift of speaking in tongues is part of the baptism of the Holy Spirit. William Seymour accepts this message, and he starts teaching it, and he's invited out to California, and there he's shunned by the church because of his controversial messaging, and he starts a Bible study, which turns into this revival out of Azusa Street in Los Angeles, California. Out of this revival, we see is born the Assemblies of God, which is the largest classical Pentecostal denomination today, which was founded in 1914 and was split in 1916 because of the oneness Pentecostal movement that arose. And out of this movement also we see the birth of the Church of God of Prophecy. And it's important to understand that this was a revolutionary message, because both the Western Church, the Roman Catholic, and the Protestant churches in the West had adopted a cessationist view of the gifts of the Spirit. And the Pentecostal church was the first. They were the first Christians in the early church, since the early church, to associate speaking in tongues with the baptism of the Holy Spirit. This was splitting the belief that the work of Christ on the cross for salvation, separate from the work of the Spirit, which is the baptism of the Holy Spirit, for the sanctification and the empowerment towards evangelism. Another notable difference with this new revival movement was the harmony between races, where even with the Jim Crow laws in the U.S., there were congregations that were mixed congregation in the Azusa Street movement. You had Black preacher, and you also have Latinos, Asians, and whites, poor and rich, coming together. And the charismatic renewal movement starts in the 1950s to the 1960s, and this was not necessarily similar to the classical Pentecostalism, where that came out of the holiness movement. It was the same type of outpouring, but in mainline denominations, which had previously shunned this first movement. You see the Pentecostal message being accepted into these various denominations, even Catholicism. And you see the outpouring of the Holy Spirit in the university settings. You see also that the theological position doesn't necessarily change, but there is a more expressive and emotional response to the worship, which may or may not come with the spiritual gifts. Now, the neo-charismatic movement that rises in the 1980s until today is then a further intensifying of this revival experience. Is known as the signs and wonders, and it's slightly opposite to the holiness movement, where you see that in the holiness movement, women would now wear makeup, and in the neo-charismatic movement, they wear excessive amount of makeups. This is known, the televangelists are generally these neo-charismatic and some mega churches. So don't fall into a trap of believing that all Pentecostals are equal. There are many different faces, many different changes that have happened to the Pentecostal movement